Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the workshop, Genomics at Work, for Prairie's crop industry, which is hosted by Genome Alberta and Genome Prairie. My name is Gijs van der Rooyen. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer for Genome Alberta. I'm co-hosting this with my colleague, Leslie Young, Chief Scientific Officer for Genome Prairie. So both Genome Alberta and Genome Prairie are publicly funded not-for-profit corporations that invest in genomics research projects and technology platforms that are aimed at delivering a positive impact for the citizens in our regions, Canada, and globally. And so we are part of a larger network of genome centers across the country. So in addition to Genome Alberta and Genome Prairie, there is Genome British Columbia, Ontario Genomics, Genome Quebec, Genome Atlantic, and Genome Canada. Today, we're delighted to have about 160 people registered for this particular webinar, of which most of them have joined us already, and I expect more people to join in the next couple of minutes. So we got participants from academia, government, industry, funding organizations, as well as our Genome Center colleagues that are joining us for this event. So the focus of today's session will be on exploring the potential of genomics for crop improvement, discussing how we can drive forward the technologies, advocate for policy changes based on the need of crop producers, and how to address misconceptions about genomics for the public. Through this workshop, we aim to have discussions that inform our funding direction and promote collaboration within the Alberta crop prairie community. All insights that will be gathered during this discussion will be summarized in a What We Heard report. And in addition to the recording of this particular session, we will make this What We Heard report available to all once it is available, and we'll advertise this through social media. And you will be receiving a note directly as well as you've registered for this conference. You may also recall that you were asked to complete a survey, and based on this survey, you rated the lack of translational funding and public perception regarding genomics for crops as the most significant challenges hindering the advancement of genomic-based technologies. Of course, we're very eager to hear the panel's thoughts on these challenges, as well as many other topics of interest that are going to be discussed here today. Now I'd like to hand over the mic to my colleague, Leslie Young, Chief Scientific Officer for Genome Prairie, who will introduce Genome Prairie and also introduce the keynote speaker and moderator for this workshop. So Lester, the mic is yours.
Great, thanks, Gijs. Agriculture has been one of the major sectors supported by Genome Canada and the Genome Centres since their inception. This has been particularly true for Genome Prairie and Genome Alberta, as agriculture plays such an integral part in much of the research done on the prairies, as well as our economies and our way of living. Genome Prairie, along with our partners and co-funders, has been proud to have supported 23 agricultural projects over the years, including projects in wheat, lentils, canola, rye, flax, and camelina, to name a few. This has resulted in the creation of detailed genetic maps of wheat, flax, and lentil, and the development of over 15 registered varieties with improved disease resistance, yields, and stress tolerance. Also, the introduction of leading-edge technologies into breeding programs has occurred to vastly increase the speed at which crop varieties are developed and brought to market. And finally, over the last 10 years, we have supported over 200 highly qualified personnel, many of whom have gone into positions in government, industry, and academia. Last year, Genome Prairie and Genome Alberta launched 5 projects in Genome Canada's most recent agriculture-focused funding opportunity, supporting research in wheat and lentil, bioinoculants, native forages, cattle grazing systems, and peas. These projects will all advance agriculture in the Prairie region and further. Together, these and other Genome Canada projects go beyond building capacity for genomics, generating data, and benefiting end users. Genome Canada projects aim to make genomics more accessible and relevant for all Canadians, as well as guiding economic, social, and policy decisions. Genome Prairie and Genome Alberta are immensely grateful to the numerous partners and co-funders who have joined us in supporting these projects over the years. Many of them are represented here today, and we look forward to hearing your opinions and your concerns about the future of crop genomics. We hope that the panel discussion will generate thoughtful questions, highlight possible barriers, and suggest potential directions to make genomics work for the prairie crop industry. Now I'd like to introduce today's keynote speaker and panel chair, Dr. Stuart Smyth. Dr. Stuart Smyth is a professor in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at the University of Saskatchewan, where he holds the Agri-Food Innovation and Sustainability Enhancement Chair. His research focuses on sustainability, agriculture, innovation, and food. With over 150 academic publications, Dr. Smyth is recognized as a leading expert on barriers to innovation and regulatory efficiency. Dr. Smyth specializes in research on regulatory barriers to food security, especially those that restrict investments into new plant breeding technologies, such as gene editing, as well as those that delay or prevent the commercialization of genetically modified and genome-edited crops. So welcome, Stuart, to the panel. Before we get on to your keynote presentation, I'd like to bring up a couple of housekeeping items. For questions, after the panel discussion, you can use the raise hand function and we'll activate your microphone for you to ask your questions. Alternatively, you can type your questions into the Q&A section and they will be addressed there. We've extended invitations to the media to attend as well. If you prefer to remain anonymous when posting questions, please check the Ask Anonymously box when submitting your inquiries. So we'd like to encourage your active participation in the questions and welcome everybody to contribute their unique perspectives to the discussion. I'm not sure if it was mentioned at the beginning, but this whole workshop has been recorded and will be made available at the end afterwards. So with that done, Stuart, could you take it away?
Thank you very much, Heis and Lester. It's a pleasure to join everybody this morning, and I think that we've got an excellent topic and a really top-notch panel that's going to provide a lot of insights, and I will purposely keep my comments to a minimum just to try to set this up a little bit, because I'm as keen as everybody else to jump in and hear what our panelists have to say this morning. So I've been asked to just sort of set the stage a little bit on this, and I think this is an illustration that really highlights how important innovation is for the agriculture sector going back over the last 60-odd years. This has been put together by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and really highlights how beginning around 1960, agriculture was able to decouple the increased need in land use to produce more food. And you can see over the last 60 years, we're through the use of only 10% more land, we're producing nearly 400% more food. So I think this really drives home the point that without innovation, the only opportunity that agriculture has to continually increase the amount of food required to feed 8 billion people is to bring more land under cultivation. And the investment that Canada's been making, I think, is amongst world leaders. When we look and compare ourselves to the EU, in the 1990s, the EU was right there with us. They were doing field trials. Spain and Portugal had commercialized GM corn in the 97, 98 period. And so we saw sort of a global movement towards biotech, but then a lot of activism got involved. And so around 2000, the EU shifted to really putting in precautionary-based regulations that's ultimately restricted a lot of their potential to increase crop productivity. And you can see that between 95 and 2020, the EU's really had marginal increase in crop productivity compared to Canada. We've had 28%, and the US is at 35%. So this is crop production across the board. So I think it shows that investments into innovation have moved out of Europe. in the mid-1990s, the EU used to, or accounted for 1/3 of all of the multinational investments into agriculture R&D. By 2015, that was down to around 8.5%, 9%. So clearly, companies investing in innovative technologies are realizing that efficiency in markets and regulations are really what's driving innovation. And so this is another illustration that I like to use, particularly with a lot of the students I teach, is showing just when biotechnology and genetically modified canola entered the Canadian market. Certainly, we had other technologies in terms of equipment that was helping bring down summer fallow acres from their peak in the late 1960s, early 1970s. And we've seen a continual decline in the number of acres across the 3 prairie provinces, which account for about 85, 86% of all crop agriculture in Canada. So that in 2023, we had less than 1 million acres across the hectares across the 3 prairie provinces that involved summer fallow, and there's significant amounts of research being done and that are ongoing that are further quantifying the environmental benefits of removing tillage from crop rotations. So when we look at the investment side of things, I don't think this comes as a surprise to anybody attending this morning, but agriculture doesn't hold a big share in the terms of the global amount of public and private money targeted at R&D. The most recent estimate I can find is that globally in 2014, so 10 years ago, about $15 billion US was invested into the agriculture R&D on the private side of things. And the public estimate is incredibly difficult to track down, just given that countries report investments in a myriad of different ways, which has made it very challenging to try to put together a public number. So when we look at where R&D is happening, you can see then that globally it's moving away from the industrialized countries into lower income and developing countries. We would certainly have observed that there's been a lot of investment into crop variety development in Brazil and Argentina over the last 20 odd years as those countries transition into industrial economies. And certainly, again, I think this is no surprise to anybody this morning, but the share of public sector R&D has continued to gradually decline over the last 60 years, dropping from almost 60% to just under 50% in 2011. And I really don't see any signal that's going to result in reversing those trends, certainly within the next decade. So there's really solid evidence that quantifies just how important and fiscally vital the investments into agriculture R&D are. A study by Julian Alston out of the University of Davis in California has found that when examining the returns on investment prior to the commercialization of most biotechnology, they found an 80% return on investment. And when we look at, that should be 2000 to 2022, we've found a range of returns in the wheat sector that range anywhere from about 7% in durum up to 40% for hard red spring wheat. But one of the challenges that agriculture faces is that the research shows there's a considerable time lag between when a technology is commercialized and peak adoption. So this tends to be around 20 years. So one of the things that I think there's a real missed opportunity in the ag sector is to have more and earlier adoption of technologies. Then we get the spillover benefits happening. So we have reduced greenhouse gas emissions, we have reduced soil erosions or reduced nutrient loss, those kinds of things. All of those benefits from the adoption of technologies will happen earlier if we could shift, say, that lag, cut it down by half and have peak adoption occurring after only 10 years instead of over 20 years. And we've done some research and looking at what's changed in terms of Canada's transitioning from UPOV 78 to UPOV 91 with plant breeders' rights in 2015. And we found that it has increased the incentive for both public and private sector plant breeders to invest more money into variety development. But one of the things that is a challenge and is going to be an ongoing challenge is that to ensure that we're minimizing our regulatory barriers. I led a study several years ago, and you can see just the impacts on our global or our national innovation pipeline when plants with novel traits were identified from a lot of public sector breeders. It simply meant that innovative research did not go forward. And in a lot of cases, the technologies, you can see that 1/3 of breeders were saying they simply ended the research on new varieties. So the potential for our crop production sector to be as innovative as it possibly can is lagging due to the barriers that PNTs were posing. So fortunately now we've had Health Canada and the CFIA both within the last couple of years announced that as long as there's no foreign DNA in the commercialized variety, they will be treated as conventional mutagenic technologies and will not be subject to the additional regulatory oversight that PNTs provide. But I still have a significant concern because both Health Canada and the CFIA have said if the varieties are herbicide tolerant, then that's automatically going to classify them as a PNT, which I think is going to really restrict the public sector potential to uptake gene editing technologies, because plant breeders or farmers have really signaled that herbicide tolerance is an important trait for them in crop varieties. And so if there's increased drought tolerance or increased disease resistance, they're going to want to see the herbicide tolerance stacked in with these new varieties. And so this continuation that herbicide tolerance is always going to be a PNT, to me, really triggers that we're still facing some considerable challenges in the future of crop genetics and genomics. And there was a study that came out last year, and I think this really highlights the fact that while we've been successful in a lot of ways with the genetics and the genomics, we can't ease up because only 1/3 of the potential benefits from biotechnology at a global level have been recognized due to regulatory barriers that have restricted farmers' ability to adopt technologies. So I think we've got a lot of opportunities, and I look forward now to turning to our panel to gain some insights from them as to what their perspectives are. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to go through and give a short introduction of themselves. Patty Rosher, will you please introduce yourself?
I sure will. Thanks, Stuart. Nice to be here. I was very happy to be invited to participate on this panel because I got to think back through the various positions I've had where I've worked with the research community, and it has always been a rewarding experience. Right now, I'm the Assistant Chief Commissioner at the Canadian Grain Commission, and I'm also a director on the Genome Prairie Board of Directors.
Thank you, Patty. Cami, Ryan.
Hi, thank you as well for this kind invitation. I'm Cami Ryan. I've kind of got an interesting background here because I was one of the first grad students to be funded through Genome Canada several years ago. And I have continued to kind of have a bit of a relationship there through some funding situations and so forth. But excited to be here on this panel. My name is Cami Ryan again. I'm Industry Affairs and Sustainability for Bayer Crop Science. And prior to this role, I worked out of the US as the lead social and behavioral scientist. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Cami. Nancy. Nancy, you're on mute.
Sorry, thanks. We have to get that out of the way. Good morning from sunny Saskatchewan, but Stuart, it's one of those rare days where the sun actually isn't shining. So my name is Nancy Toad, and I'm the Chief Science Officer with the Global Institute for Food Security. For those that don't know who we are located on the University of Saskatchewan campus, and we are a unique public-private partnership. So most of my career, over 20 years, has been spent in the private industry. But I was really excited to sort of jump into this very rare model, but I think it's a model where kind of the magic happens where people come together from different disciplines, whether it's producer organizations, the private sector, as well as the public research community, and what tremendous synergies we can have and help to advance innovation. So thanks for the invitation. I'm excited to participate.
Thank you, Nancy. Ian.
Thanks, Ian Affleck with CropLife Canada. I'm the Vice President of Plant Biotechnology. So a large part of what I do is focus on regulation as well as communication and public trust when it comes to innovations in the plant science sector. And CropLife Canada is the national trade association representing the plant science sector, a sector focused on creating agricultural solutions for farmers that can range from everything from things that often make the headlines like GMOs and gene editing and traditional pesticides, but all the way through to biologicals and to you name it. If there's a problem in agriculture, the plant science sector is looking to invent a solution to help manage it.
Thank you, Ian. Lauren.
Lauren Hepworth. I'm mostly a retired guy, but I currently serve as the chair of the Agricultural Research Institute of Ontario, soon to be named Agriculture Research and Innovation Ontario. We're an advisory body to the Minister of Agriculture here in Ontario, as well as to the ministry. And in addition, we are the owners of the various research properties where research is conducted in Ontario. There's 14 research stations comprising of about 5,000 acres and close to $200 million in new investments over the last 10 or so years in new facilities for dairy, beef, feedlot, swine, and soon to be new poultry facilities.
Thank you, Lauren. Francois.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Francois Eudes. I'm with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada at the Science and Technology branch. My title is Director, Research, Development and Technology. I have the leadership of the portfolio in breeding innovation and crop germplasm development, which is a national portfolio, which gives me the opportunity to oversee all the work that we do in biotechnology, omics, and genetics in crops. My background is in plant biology and biotechnology. Before moving into the management team, I led a science program for over 15 years in plant biotechnology. My focus was on developing breeding tools from cell culture to gene editing, and I'll touch a little bit on the synthetic biology as well.
Thank you, Francois. So let's get right down to business. I've got a series of questions here for each of the panelists, and what I'll plan to do is ask one question and we'll work through the panel, and we'll see. We've got about an hour set up for this portion of it, maybe just slightly over, and we'll see how far we get through the list of questions, and then we'll turn it over, say around 10 a.m. my time, to questions from all the attendees. So Patty, first question to you. Genome Canada was established just over 20 years ago in 2000 with a mandate towards building Canada's technology and human capacity in genomics. Where do you, from your perspective, where do you see genomics research in the Canadian context now? And do you feel that we've accomplished some of those early goals and objectives that were around the establishment of Genome Canada?
Thanks for that question, Stuart. I was listening to Lester's introduction very carefully. He laid out all kinds of successes, I guess, that we've had with on the genomic side. I hear all the time that genomics is mainstream research now. It's in many hands, it's in many applications, limitless potential. It sounds like a good success story there. More work to be done. I think Genome Canada's approach has also been successful because it embeds economics through the GELS component. So it's looking at ethical, environmental, economic, legal, and social aspects in all of the work. And it's breaking down that supposed dichotomy between economics and science And a lot of my old colleagues are now working on genomics projects, and I think that's fantastic. That's such a great model. And I also want to say that in 2014, the International Wheat Genome Sequencing Consortium published the first sequence of the wheat genome, so we should be having a party this year. You can call it a symposium if you want, but we should be celebrating 10 years of access to that technology. So all the success has me thinking, like, what's next? What would benefit from a Genome Canada approach? And I wonder, maybe AI data sets and education, and as we talked about that. But I threw that question out to people I've run into over the last couple of weeks, and they're always talking about people and infrastructure, just the basics of crop research. We may be lacking a little bit. I was in charge of the research strategy at Manitoba Agriculture. We didn't want to pay for overhead. We didn't want to put money into bricks and mortar. We didn't want to pay for expensive equipment. We wanted to just fund the work. And HQPs were always a target outcome, but there was perhaps a gap left there. So when the WGRF put out its call for research capacity proposals, I mean, that was interesting. And research positions being the first off, and then now calls for equipment and infrastructure. I'm very interested in what Manitoba Crop Alliance's capacity research project is going to show, because they're looking at what the capacity is in private and public agronomic research in the province. And I think that's going to be very helpful. Lastly, at the Grain Commission, our research capacity limit is actual capacity limit, because we are famously doing science in the top floors of a downtown office building. And we've been asked politely to leave. So we are on our way out at some point, but in the meantime, we need a bigger footprint, and we're doing quite a bit of work on our generators and mechanical systems, because we have been pushing this old building to the limit. That's our capacity constraint.
Thank you, Patty. Just as an observation on that, I was asking my students yesterday about employment opportunities, because they're graduating, and they said a number of companies that our students end up working for companies doing crop research over the summer. They said all of these companies have not been able to fill their summer student positions. That most of the companies doing crop research are short summer students going, we're a month away, for 6 weeks away from the end of classes. And so this capacity need, I think, filters right down even from the plant breeder level all the way through to summer students available to do the basic agronomy work in the field trials. So it's certainly across the sector, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. So, Cami, I'll turn to you now, and we've seen over the last 25 to 30 years the emergence of a number of different traits in terms of crop technologies. And there's always been some consternation at the public level that, uncertainty or certainty about what's going on in terms of food development. Sometimes it seems that it's a lot of public chatter, because retailers are simply reporting that price and nutrition are the leading factors when it comes to consumer purchasing. But what would some of your insights be about where consumers or where some of the new genomic technologies, do you think they offer increased potential to be consumer friendly, for a lack of a better terminology?
So really good question, and I appreciate that, Stuart. There's been a lot of advancement over the last 20, 30 years, and I don't even think I have to probably emphasize that with this group, of course. But historically, a lot of these genomic techniques, especially when they were first coming out, they were really applied to large scale crops or row crops and so forth. So those benefits were kind of it worked really well with the farmers. And they were perceived to only benefit the farmers, even though there was a delivery of safe, plentiful, and probably lower cost foods to the consumer in the end. But we also weren't historically very good at talking about this. Science moves at an incredible pace, and we as consumers, we as a society have a hard time keeping up with it. And even if you are in the science, you have a hard time keeping up with it. And so where we lacked in the past is really communicating. And I think that that's where we lost the public a lot. Now, what we have is, because we're advancing so quickly, and now we're moving through these advanced breeding techniques that would make Gregor Mendel's mind blown. And my grandmother's too, because she was a backyard plant breeder. And so she would see all of this as something amazing and value add. But what now we have is we have these new products that are coming out. And if you want color in your life, there are new purple tomatoes, there are pink glow pineapple, and there are Arctic apples. And all of a sudden, what we've done is we have cut through the barrier between the science and the consumer. And all of a sudden, they could see the benefit, and they can actually taste it, smell it, feel it. So they feel like they're part of it. And I think one of the biggest things that is advanced with all of this is now we have small and medium innovative companies actually doing and developing these products. Like, for example, Norfolk Plant Sciences. If the branding and so forth of the purple tomato comes together with something like that, all of a sudden the consumer sees the connection to the science. In the past, if you had a herbicide tolerant canola, I mean, they don't even see that. They don't see the packaging. They don't see the branding. So for them, they don't have that relationship. And I think that this is something that we can still improve upon. And I don't even have to talk about how this has really helped farming and row crop growers over the past several decades. I mean, there's been really important advancements in this space.
Thank you. Yeah, and when we go back and we think that it was 1994 when Calgene planted their first thousands of acres of genetically modified tomatoes, we've now got 30 years of crop production. So this is not a recent innovation, is it?
It's not, but we don't talk about it. I got to say something interesting. I was at a national conference last week, and it was excellent at the crop convention. And we had a lot of non-ag guest speakers there. And the two things that they talked about, each one of them, which was interesting. One, there is a rural-urban divide, which we can all agree with here. Second, they said, you need to start communicating about this stuff. And we're sitting back, and our first response in the audience is, but we're doing a really good job. I mean, we've really come a long way. But what it made me realize is that we may still be talking to ourselves. And if that's the case, we've got a lot more work to do, and it doesn't go away. When you talked before, Stuart, about earlier adoption, I think what we have to start thinking about is when we think of the regulatory pipeline in terms of bringing a new product to market, we have to think before, during the development of these products, and think about, how can I anticipate what those narratives are going to be out there? How can I anticipate what might happen? Because if we're not communicating about them in a meaningful way to broader audiences, and they're left with blank spaces, those blank spaces in today's world of mass social media, those blank spaces are going to be filled by somebody else who can extract value from sharing that disinformation. So I think we've still got lots of opportunities here. And it's not only in terms of communication and how we communicate and connect, but it's also how we think about doing business. We have to think way ahead of the pipeline and anticipate some of these things so that we can get ahead of them. And that way we might evolve into earlier adoption, because what we know is that public perceptions drive public policy. So if we can get ahead of some of these perceptions, we might be able to advance things a little quicker.
Thank you, Cami. So switching from the knowledge communication to the technology efficacy in terms of how plant breeding and gene editing go together, Nancy, we've seen the the increase in precision of plant breeding technologies, where we've had random untargeted mutation technologies used since they were first developed in the 1930s that changed tens of thousands of genes with some, many of those with unknown effects, and biotechnology got us a big step forward that we're inserting genes with known effects. And now with gene editing, we can tweak one gene to increase or decrease or turn it off completely. Do you see any further reductions in the risk profile of plant breeding technologies? And might there be concerns about some of the off-target effects from gene editing that were raised when shortly after the technology was first adopted 8 or 9 years ago?
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. The short answer is no. And I think the key word that I picked up from your introductory question there was just on the precision. And so as the breeder's toolbox has become increasingly more sophisticated and genomics enabled, any risk from the potential off targets can be two things. It can be predicted now through all the genomic information that we have, and it can be mitigated in a number of different ways. And so that's all good news. And we can do that through good gene editing tool design, the selection process itself, and the breeding process, and experimental conditions that we set. And so really the presence of those off-targets effects that you kind of talked about, we can also directly investigate that using targeted DNA sequencing. And something that you couldn't reasonably do when you talk about, you introduced sort of the concept of random sort of mutation that was done sort of historically. And again, the cost of genomic sequencing has really gone down. But putting that a little bit aside, additionally, there's been a lot of science done around those off-target effects. And looking at that, although they are possible, they rarely occur even at those predicted off-target sites in plants. And so I think we should take great comfort in knowing that yes, it absolutely can occur, but then when you look at the risk and then how we can mitigate that. So one thing I wanted to sort of pick up on, because I think about, we talk about gene editing, but I think about even fast forwarding to technologies like engineering biology and synthetic biology. And so I read a McKinsey report that said 70% of the potential impact of technologies, and I heard you, Stuart, say it takes 30 years to actually to peak in the adoption of technologies. And so if we also add on the barrier of 70% of the potential impact of these genomic technologies will hinge on consumer, societal, and regulatory acceptance. So, Cami, I take your comments to heart. But do we spend enough time sort of focusing on that? And so my wish is that as we start to think about engineering biology, and we at the Global Institute for Food Security have just set up Canada's first engineering biology platform that's going to focus solely on agriculture and agri-food opportunities in that space. And so, Cami, yes, we need to stay ahead of it. Genome Canada, yes, congratulations, you include that GELS component in that. But public trust is going to be critical for novel technologies like engineering biology. And so if we want to really truly make an impact of that technology in the field, at the field level, it could be derailed by failure to engage with and inform the public, which, yes, Cami, the public really informs sort of policy development and regulatory development. So I really look forward to, when we think about whether it's off-target effects or any other aspect of policy and regulations around genomic-based technologies, we really have to sort of stay ahead of the regulatory space. We should be thinking about, Ontario Genomics did put out a white paper around engineering biology, but let's start engaging the public today on really these emerging technologies in the genomic space. And really I look forward to those technologies to be able to make a huge impact versus what happened with GM technology many, many years ago.
Thank you, Nancy. I was talking to a plant breeder last year, and you mentioned, I think the key point there is the cost of sequencing technology is now dropped precipitously. And they said they would take the sequence data, they would make the gene edits, and then the cost is so low, they were resequencing the edited variety, and they could they could examine where they made the edits, and they know exactly what the off-target effects were. And as you say, they were finding that there was absolutely no change in the risk profile of the edit. So again, it comes back to the science is able to provide that certainty to regulators and to the food industry and consumers across the board, saying these are an evolution of innovative technologies, and the risk is actually decreasing.
Absolutely. Our machines downstairs in our basement are loading up all the sequencing information, the DNA library preparations, and within 18 hours, you can sequence an entire wheat genome. So you're absolutely right. The information with certainty, you can sort of understand what those targets and edits have been made, and with great certainty and confidence scientifically.
Thank you, Nancy. Ian, turning to you now. So the plant biotech industry has played a fundamental role in Canada in terms of bringing innovative technologies and environmental and consumer benefits for 25 years now. And as we continue to move forward, where do you see the greatest potential for genomic technologies, say over the course of, we're really in a lot of environmental perspectives, right, looking at this 2030 target. Where do you see the greatest potential from genomics over the remainder of the decade?
Yeah, and I think, we've talked about gene editing and CRISPR and things of that nature, and I'll go down that same road. I don't want to diminish like the detection technologies like omics and the ability to analyze what it is that we're even looking at. I think is going to have a huge impact on the ability for people to do baseline research that will inform some of the broader plant breeding. But in terms of gene editing for plant breeding alone, there's so many different ways that it can be a game changer. I think speaking to what Cami said, if people are working on forward-facing customer traits, pairwises, arugula, that's got a better flavor profile, non-browning lettuce, like people will understand the value, and maybe this is oversimplifying, the value of plant breeding at all. We've done polling in the past, and we've done focus groups where we've had a decent amount of people say, well, plant breeding's not a real job. Like no one breeds plants. There's just corn and there's soy, and then that's it. So it's not just the tool itself, but just the value of plant breeding as a baseline activity to what drives agriculture forward. So it can be a game changer from a public point of view in terms of people being drawn into our sector. And then a game changer in terms of an agricultural point of view. I think drought resistance, nitrogen efficiency, disease resistance, these traits that are really tough to make forward progress on. Now with this extra tool in the toolbox, plant breeders will have another opportunity to make those advancements and to adjust to a changing climate. One of the things that I think might be the most interesting, and sometimes I've said, is like, I think one of the most exciting parts of gene editing will be some of the most boring work, whereas it won't be an 8% more disease-resistant variety. It'll be a 17% more disease-resistant variety in 5 years instead of 7. And like compound interest in the bank, that's going to pay off massive dividends over time. That won't be headline news. There won't be CBC interviews to the plant breeder who's dedicated their life to driving that forward, using every tool in the toolbox, gene editing included. But that kind of march of progress of plant breeding, I think, is where some of the most amazing benefits will come. And to that point, I think as we tell our story, and Cami mentioned it, it's gene editing grabs a headline, GMOs grab a headline. It's the plant breeder, it's the research scientist that is truly the person who is creating these wonderful products, right? It's the tool is just the tool. A hammer and a screwdriver and a drill is just a tool. It's the carpenter that builds the home. We don't celebrate the hammer, we celebrate the building of a home. And I think bringing that story back in helps people understand that it's not this like cold, unlovable tool in a toolbox that's doing all the work. It's a person who's dedicated their life to advancing plants for the betterment of society. That's, I think, a story that's often untold. And if I was a plant breeder, I'd be annoyed that all the headlines are on gene editing, and you're sitting there going, that doesn't mean anything if I don't use it. So I think reminding people that there's humans, dedicated humans behind the use of these tools, that's really valuable.
Thank you very much, Ian. Lauren,
sorry, can I just add something, Stuart?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, please, Cami.
I loved Ian's what Ian said there. I think that's the trick right now, is we as part of this communication strategy, whatever we do, we are obligated to humanize what we do. We're not any less human or more human than anybody out there. And I think because there's been so many gaps in terms of information, there are other people out there without the expertise, without the knowledge, that just are darn good storytellers. And we as human beings are story chasers. That's what we want. And so if someone else is filling it in, even if it's inaccurate, we are having a relationship with that citizen journalist, that citizen scientist, that wellness guru. And so we've kind of not built that role. But the other thing is too, is that science generally, I mean, they call it the ivory tower for a reason. You are up there because you're removed from society to do your good work. So it's never been part of the realm of science to really get out there and communicate with the public. But I think that's changing. And I think that's another capacity building opportunity that we have in post-secondary institutions plus K-12, is to start talking about science in more meaningful ways so that we can connect, but also training scientists so that they can get out there and not only talk about their science, because people want to hear about the science, but they want to know what you do in your spare time. They want to know why you love this science. That's what they want.
Thank you, Cami. Anybody else got a point to jump in with? Well, I see Lorne waiting eagerly for his question. So, Lorne, I teach a class on innovation, and one of the clips I show the students are two historians talking about the importance of the pace of innovation. And they highlight that 2,000 years ago in the Roman Empire, there was a lot of concern about the pace of innovation 2,000 years ago. So clearly this is an issue that's not new and unique to our time or our generation. And as we see the pace of innovation, increasing over the last 30, 40, 50 years, where do you see some of the real gains in terms of how technology can make our producers more competitive at a global scale, and then also how can it provide consumers with healthier or more nutritious or more sustainable products that they're looking for in their weekly purchases?
Well, good morning, Stuart and other panelists, and thanks to Heiss and Lester for hosting this event. And Stuart, by the way, I love your posts, so keep that up. In terms of the pace of innovation relative to the farmer and to the consumer, I'm going to spend most of my time with a little bit off the wall stuff on the consumer. I mean, I think historically, the industry, has the approach has been typically, and you've heard it this morning, been aimed at increasing crop and food production and for adaptation to weather and insect pests and those sorts of things. And for good reason, and some of this was alluded to in your presentation. Still have the growing world population, and there's still about 800 million people in the world that are undernourished. So good reason to concentrate on those historical aspects. And now for a little bit of off the wall from a consumer perspective, and we've had a lot of discussion already on consumer acceptance and understanding of the technology. So I'm going to just throw one out there that's, like I said, a little bit off the wall from it's a first world consumer perspective. And if we think about the future, one of the technologies that's getting a lot of headlines these days from a technology standpoint is the weight loss drugs, the appetite suppressant market. The Ozempic, I mean, you can hardly watch television without seeing an Ozempic and Rybelsus ad. The whole semaglutide, the GLP-1 as they're called. And maybe that interest shouldn't surprise us, given that at least one report I've seen is that there is 1 billion people in the world that are obese. So, you got this almost these two dimensions. You got 800 million people undernourished and 1 billion people. Unfortunately, I count myself amongst those who are obese. I keep complaining that my broad mind and narrow waist keep changing places. Morgan Stanley had a really interesting report, I thought, in this regard. And on one hand, it talks about what could be a negative for the food industry. And on the other hand, there's a potential for some opportunities. So the Morgan Stanley makes the point in their report that anti-obesity medication patients report a 23% decrease in daily meals and a 50% decrease in snacks. So, you know, from the standpoint of food production, this definitely caught the eyes of some of the eyes and the ears of some of the companies in the food business. I mean, Walmart was one to kind of quickly get into and have some analysis on there. And I think the words they used on an investor presentation was they see a slight pullback in sales. Other companies, because of some of the knock-on effects of Ozempic, of these anti-obesity medications, see some opportunity. So what are some of the knock-on effects? Well, one is that on these medications, you see increased protein uptake, increased fruits and vegetables, and just as the stats just said about the decrease in snacks, you got a decrease in snacks and drinks. So if you're a snack and drink company, you're probably a little more concerned maybe than the grocery guys. So the Nestle's of the world, the Mondelez of the world, Mondelez just said, hey, it's overblown. The Nestle's of the world see opportunities here because, you know, they've got this whole active protein business. So one of the knock-on effects has been even people that aren't maybe taking the medication, seeing all the, you know, stories about it, are shifting their consumer purchasing to healthier food selections like the fruits and vegetables and also the proteins. Also, there's another knock-on effect that if you transition off these drugs sooner or later, then they also want to you know, continue with a better diet. And then secondly, an increase in consumption of foods that have, and I'm starting to get well out of my territory here, the you know, the starches, the resistant starches, and the prebiotic fibers, those kinds of things. So the companies that are in those businesses also see a potential opportunity. There's one company, Supergut, that's now making bars, apparently, that have the resistant starches and the prebiotic fibers. They call it Nature's Ozempic. So now for the red flag. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the science behind some of this stuff. But I raise it because the bottom line in my mind is, you know, not sure what it's all about. You see the varying reactions of food companies. But given that some of the foodstuffs, that will come from crops that are going to be triggered by this interest and by the issue of obesity, never mind the diabetes and all the other claims, may well present some opportunities for the food industry, and in terms of how we use the technologies to look at some of how we construct some of the products that might be interesting to them. Some other interesting innovations that I would just throw on the table that I see some of the venture capital guys spending money on, that caught my eye recently, is the neoplants, where you use GE plants to remediate VOCs. Another one, Windfall Bio, a process to boost natural methane-eating microbes in the soil. And for some of you who remember the early days of Genome Canada, when I was involved there, I remember at one of the first conferences that we had, which was probably like, 15 years ago now, the fellow from Esso, one of the guys from Esso spoke that had been involved in the Esso spill. I forget the name of it, the big ship spill. And he talked interestingly about the discovery of these microbiomes down in the ocean that were literally oil-eating microbiomes. And they looked at targeting drilling rigs in the future where there was populations of these microbiomes when they were doing drilling in the deep sea. So some interesting kind of off the wall relative to methane releases, if you like, in agriculture. Another interesting point, and I'll just end on this, Stuart, that Hegarty made, was a fellow involved with robotics and drones in Ontario. I was at one of our board meetings and made the observation, and I really took it to heart, is that when we think about some of the applications that are used successfully in other industries, whether it be healthcare, robotics, logistics, you name it, other of these disruptive technologies, the car industry, we should think about where are the potential applications in the ag food business so that we can learn from other sectors. So I'll end there.
Lauren, that's really interesting. So I know we've talked a little bit about this in the past, but this concept of One Health has been around for about a decade, and in following it, I see there's been lots of discussion, but I can't say I've seen lots of advancement. Do you think that maybe now that's beginning to shift and that we will see a tighter integration between the increased availability of nutrients and minerals in our weekly diets and the spillover benefits from having a more nutritious diet, for example?
Well, you've hit on one of my favorite topics, one of my hobby horses. If you're asking any of my board members at ARIO, I constantly reference, I think, an opportunity in the discovery science realm. You mentioned One Health. I kind of call it the One Earth. And what I mean by that, is there an opportunity for us to understand better the interplay between the soil/root microbiome, the gut microbiome of humans and animals to a much better degree than we do. You know, we have a fair amount of research, lots of research, quite frankly, it's gone on above soil. But my sense is we do a lot less, in the soil or under the soil. And I think and this is like your high impact transformational kind of work that's, you're not going to get the answers to all this in a 1 or 2 year project. And it has many implications. It has nutritional implications, fertilizer uptake implications, climate change implications, resistance implications, whether it's on the animal or the antibiotic resistance or the pesticide resistance, all those kinds of things. So I'd like to think there's some real opportunities here. And, who was it? Nancy had a wish. I had a wish. I'd like to see a major 10, 15-year project on discovery science in the whole One Earth microbiome area. So that's my pitch for the day, Stuart.
Thank you, Lauren. Greatly appreciated. Francois, over to you. So agriculture has really increased its efficiency in terms of, as I said earlier, we've increased our production capabilities by about 28% over the last 20, 25 years. So agriculture is very used to the adoption of new technologies or the integration of new technologies. And certainly the big one now is big data and AI. And like any technology, there's always going to be, advantages and some disadvantages. Where do you see, what does the landscape look like from both sides of the coin there from your perspective?
Well, thanks, Stuart. So first, maybe to define a little bit the big data, I would say it comes from an aggregate of data and different type of data sets. So when we look at how the big data can be used on farm decision, they would come from multiple years, and again, type of data set. So for example, the geolocalization of a single farm or field, the soil data, precipitation data, the crop rotation, pest intervention, crop species and varieties, or the information about the genetics of this particular plant species that is being seeded. Obviously, crop yield, and there's lots of farm machinery now with sensors collecting data. So all these series of data are collected from the field of subsection of the field. And it's that level of data sets and this series of data sets that are combined all together, whether they have the same cropping system or not, and from users around the world. So the compounded data sets, big data sets, help to create a model that consider multiple factors based on data collected by the sensors. It takes a lot of calibration, takes a lot of standardization also of the type of data sets. And that can be used to predict optimum treatments, such as fertilizer or pesticide, in order to achieve highest crop performance. And so when you speak about the adoption, interestingly, the most traditional of companies such as John Deere have launched several big data-enabled service that let farmers benefit from real-time monitoring of data collected from there from thousands of users, not just in particular county or in particular one province in Canada, but globally. And so they're being used to provide predictive insights in farming operation and make recommendation to the producer. So it is really the power of the large data sets, which is collected, that allow machine learning algorithm or neural network, which is a type of artificial intelligence, to determine treatments that could have the greatest impact in that particular farm. So it helps to contextualize and make recommendation. Working with larger data sets, so this big data, unable to have a less or to reduce the variability in the model. And so it increases the accuracy of the prediction model, increase the confidence in that prediction for on-farm recommendation.
Thank you, Francois. Patty, back to you again. So in December 2022, the Cartagena, or the Global Convention on Biodiversity was in Montreal. And out of that came the Global Biodiversity Framework. And in attending that, I observed a lot of the discussions were really fixated on environmental sustainability. And in discussions with people there, I said, you realize that as agriculture adopts this, economic sustainability has to be the driver. Farmers will not face, or the agriculture sector will really push back against policies or movements in the direction that would potentially restrict their profitability, even though it may improve environmental sustainability. And so those discussions were really quite interesting. I think a lot of the environmental discussions were sort of missing the key importance of economic sustainability. I'm curious as to where your thoughts are. Do you think that the pendulum's still largely in the middle there, or is it maybe swung one way or the other at the moment?
Thanks, Stuart. It's such an interesting question, because so much of the discussion this winter has been complaints, I guess, from some of the crop commissions that the federal government swung a little too far, and the research priorities that they're bringing don't match those interests of the farmers. So they're not thinking about yield and agronomics as much as they should. It's too much focus on emissions and carbon sequestration. And this is an interesting, it's the intersection of communication that we were just talking about and consultation. I mean, I was not involved in setting any of the research priorities under the SCAP. I have been involved in the previous CAP and our own science strategy, of course. But we have to think about public funding for research as a public policy tool that's set to address a market failure, because the market is not meeting the objectives of the government. And so we're not always going to get, I've worked on both sides of the issue here. Farm groups are not always going to get perfect alignment with their priorities. Last time around, we were all talking about the Barton report and the economic potential. And now the overriding policy objective for the federal government is climate change. It was in the minister's mandate letter, it was in the Grain Commission's mandate letter. It is at number one. However, what that looks like in the end is really based on agreement between government and stakeholders. And so that's this communication piece and consultation. And I think we can be better on both sides of that. Government can do better on consultation, industry could do better on communication. On the communication, unfortunately, researchers and research advocates always have to explain their science to people like me. I never set foot in a lab in university. I have a commerce degree, I have a master's in ag economics and an MBA. You have to be explaining things to me all the time. That's just the job. Just like if you're Stuart, when you have a new class in September, do you look at them and say, oh, what a bunch of dummies. I just told these guys all this stuff last term. No, that's your job. You just get down to it. But you have to find out how the policymakers receive their information. with a survey, and Genome Prairie is actually putting a survey out this month, or even when you're in an advocacy meeting, a lobby meeting, ask them where they get their information from. I get 3 media monitoring reports every morning. If something is in a mainstream media, I will see it, or farm media, I will see it. I love in-person seminars. I will go to every seminar I can at the U of M, or here the Grain Research Lab puts on a monthly seminar, or Crop Connect, all the farm groups where they have their research talks. That's good. It's very interactive. I can ask my stupid questions. I enjoy that a lot. I get a lot from that. I don't listen to podcasts because they don't go at my speed. I can't scan through them. I find that annoying. We reminisced amongst the panelists about the old red folder. Do you remember the red folder that would pass from desk to desk, that would have the trade magazines and the newspapers and papers? And of course, those work environments don't exist anymore. So trade papers are kind of lost to us, the trade magazines. They're online now, which is good, but sometimes they're hard to read because they kept the old formatting. But point is, how we get our information is how we public policy makers get our information. You can just ask. We'll let you know. On the government consultation side, you know, that classic picture of the 2 islands, and underneath the water, it's a joined landmass. Most of the consultation we do is government issues a discussion document. We have written submissions from all the groups. We issue a what we heard report, and then there's a policy announcement, a policy direction. And so you're leaving it to government to figure out what's below the surface. We're trying to figure out what makes sense, what's going to result in a good policy. I think that the more standing advisory kind of committees we have, the more where we're all in the room together talking through an issue, I think that would be good. I also think we should be taking a marketing approach here, because it's the same thing. If you're trying to develop a new product for somebody to buy, you want to find out about them as an individual, what they value, and how they want to approach it, so that you would do focus groups, surveys, consumer public surveys. You would develop a user persona of the kind of, I think about this in terms of farming. There's small farmers, they're big, it's a diverse group now. If we could find out more about, as individuals, how they perceive a policy, that would be good. Probably the same as researchers, probably the same for consumers. So let's bring a little business, little marketing research to the aspect. In the end, though, you know, there may always be a gap between government policies, government direction, because they are looking beyond the industry. They have objectives, they have international commitments, they have intra-government kind of negotiations, even factors to balance. So, you know, it's a public policy tool. We have to keep that in mind.
Patty, I'm curious. So most of these international agreements started in 2015 with the Paris Accord, and as Ian highlighted, you know, it takes maybe a decade to 15 years or 12 years to get a product to market. So, you know, research that would have started in 2015 still won't have anything today in the market, yet we're supposed to achieve these targets by 2030. So we might only have 3 to 5 years of actual adoption when we know it takes over 20 years to get adoption. Do you think that lack of awareness about the time taken to commercialize a product and then the peak adoption, do you think that's well understood within sort of our governance structure around our commitments to climate change?
Well, I think it's, I'm not going to say yes or no. I don't know what my colleagues know or don't know, but more information is always better. We see the ministers get shuffled, the deputy ministers get shuffled. Now ADMs get shuffled federally, provincially. So you're always dealing with a new group of people, and that's good for government. And we want a well-functioning government. But when we get people are shuffled, of course, we're annoyed. I'm speaking on the other side now, on the non-government side now. We're so annoyed. we just got this person trained up. We had a great relationship. We had some good momentum on an issue. And now we have to, start all over again with this new person. This is why it's very important that we don't just think about a meeting with the minister, but we have all of the policy analysts behind them being part of the communication, part of the effort, because we want to create resiliency. That helps keep things moving forward. Those international, anything at that level is just, well, I've been to those meetings. It's amazing. It's amazing. We get progress done when we spend hours and hours on a single sentence, getting the wording right. It's really, everybody should witness it. It's quite something.
Maybe I'll just,
but we want to build resiliency in the process.
I was going to add to that, Patty. I'll say it. They don't know. They don't know how long it takes for ag tech to come into space and be adopted. But the thing that I would say, when someone doesn't know something, that's not the person's fault who doesn't know it. It's the fault of the person who didn't tell it to them. So I just point the finger back at myself and say, if someone doesn't know my story, it's because I didn't tell it to them. Because then it empowers you to fill the knowledge gap. So while it is, at political levels and others, they won't know that. How would they know that? They don't work in that space. And I think there's an example, and I won't talk about who specifically I was speaking to, but we just recently had new guidance developed for gene editing in Canada, which is great, creates a research environment for us here, puts Canada kind of at the forefront. One of them got published in May of a certain year, and 2 months later I had a call going, so what's going in the ground this year that's gene edited and new and awesome, and how many hundreds of thousands of acres should we see, and how many millions of dollars? And I was like, call me in 4 or 5 years maybe. We just got the guidance to get the research done. We're like, this is a long-term investment here, but it's like in the world of folks who don't live in the ag space, research space like we do, they thought, oh, we changed the guidance and I'm assuming you'll have something in the ground in 3 or 4 weeks. So but that's not their fault. They don't know. We never told them. So that created an opportunity for a conversation where we were able to sit down and explain that innovation pathway, and it created the foundation for future conversations about the importance of research.
Stuart, I'd like to weigh in on this if I could.
Sure.
And I want to pick up on your opening question there around the pendulum. Are we coming back into balance? And I think there's some evidence of that. And I'd throw out a few examples to me to support that. You saw the reaction to the fertilizer announcement in Canada. It was a fairly, whether there was a miscommunication there or policy, or I'll not get into that. But at the same time, I think maybe Patty referenced that it appears to people from like me on the outside looking in and maybe not real well informed on all of the stuff at AFC, that the policy does look a bit unidimensional at the moment. So you have the fertilizer reaction from farmers in Canada. And then you look in the news and you see the tractor demonstrations in Europe, India, Poland, France, the EU pushing back. There's a kind of like 2 or 3 or 4 things that the media recount when they observe why are the farmers out there massively with these demonstrations. And it does include prices, but it also includes the pushback on terms of the green agenda that the EU is undertaking there. And I think you've seen some significant backtracking, or let's take it a lot slower. All that to say, that the pace of policy implementation is, on the one hand, we want the technologies out there quick, but in terms of the pace of policy implementation, I think one has to understand the crowd they're dealing with. And then secondly, when you're dealing with complicated issues, in my experience politically, all of the stuff today is complicated. And so the average person cannot get their head around what it is. They will probably judge on why. If you give them a good why are you doing this, then more people will likely buy into it than try to understand the what. A final comment in terms of to what Ian and Patty both said in terms of educating the folks and the turnover at senior levels. The part of the issue that I see over the last 20 or 30 years, and it's not just a one political party or one kind of government, is you've seen a shift of the communications function and the policy functions into the minister's offices and away from the departments. And I think that's a big problem, quite frankly. I understand why governments want to do it, but I think it does. I think it just increases the risk of short-termism, if you like, because politicians come and go, but departments don't. And I think they're losing a lot of advantage of good advice from their policy on both, from their departments on policy and as well communications.
Thank you, Lauren. So, Cami, Lauren raised an interesting point there with the farm protests across Europe for the, since the start of the year. That, as I mentioned in the opening, that precautionary-based policies in the EU have now finally pushed farmers to the breaking point, and they're saying, look, we can't take policies that are not based on evidence anymore. And we see that, social media platforms and mainstream media are constantly referring to things that are not factually correct or based on evidence, and it goes so far as the Mexican government trying to ban the import of GM corn and claiming that they've got robust evidence to support this when it's, I looked at the report and it's based on retracted publications. So you mentioned last week that you were in Winnipeg and were challenged to say, how does agriculture tell its story? Mm-hmm. I'm curious, where do you, or what are some of your insights into how can we do a better job?
Well, that will take more than this panel time would allow, but I think we have multifaceted opportunities here. And one of the ones I kind of I could talk about mis and disinformation till the cows come home. You guys know that. But anyway, I want to talk about this because I think this is a key thing. One, we're clearly still talking to ourselves. So we have to find ways to reach outside our bubble. And what I heard last week at the Crops Convention was this, is that public still they see farmers as being anti-climate change. They see all of these narratives. Now, this is not necessarily all true, right? But what we're doing as an industry now is we're responding. We're solutions providers. So Lauren just mentioned, like, he talked about all those little solutions that we can come up with, and so did Francois. These are things that we're doing. Agriculture is solutions providers. We're not good at talking about that we're solutions providers. But this is an opportunity for us to weigh in and find ways that can carve some ground or put a ship between those two islands that Patty was talking about, between farming and societies or consumers. And the thing is that what societies value is they like sustainability. They like the climate change issue is huge for them. And this is what's driving public policy. But we also have a disconnect at the farm, meaning, and I run into this all the time. I have sustainability in my title, and I have people coming up to me, my friends, family members going, hey, what's this sustainability stuff? But the reality is these are sort of abstract terms, but what we are trying to do in agriculture and what we need to communicate better is that the solutions we are coming up with and are hopefully being adopted on the farm are things that do help farmers to adapt to climate change, that do offer sustainable solutions. What we do have is we have a break in the communication. And I think that there is an opportunity to align between farming and consumers because they want the same things. Farmers have never not wanted good soil. Farmers have never not wanted to steward the land to the best that they could because it's in their best interest, not only for their lives, but their livelihood. And so I think there's an opportunity to connect those dots a little bit more through some of these solutions we're coming up with, but we got to be able to tell that story. And it can be a little bit tough, but we got to link these more abstract concepts. And I mean, bear's one of them, right? We have a vision for regenerative ag. We have a vision for sustainability, and a lot of companies do. But what we're all trying to do is we're trying to value add on that, so that the farmer sees value, right? They'll go, oh, well, those are just words, right? Those are what our critics used to say back in the day. Well, the difference we're trying to make now is going beyond the ideology, beyond the abstractness, and trying to develop these solutions that also are measurable. Because if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So pulling data into this and getting the farmers so that they understand, because farmers will not adopt sustainable options or sustainable practices if they're not simple, easy, and profitable. That's where we connect the farmers. But we can connect the consumers to the farmer by telling good stories around all of these things collectively.
Thank you, Cami. Nancy, so one of the amazing things about innovation is it has that fluid ability to see what's working in another technological area and adapt successful mechanisms or products or whatever into an existing or into a different application. Where, or do you see any current technologies that exist in sectors outside of agriculture that you think might be adaptable within agriculture over the next few years?
Absolutely. I think Lauren raised this as well too. And one area that I really offer up, and it's still within the agricultural sector, but I feel it's an area that we really need to sort of accelerate within our genomics community. So if you think about genomic selection, it was pioneered by the dairy industry a couple decades ago. And they've seen tremendous gains out of those systems through the use of genomic selection technology. Large agribusinesses have been using genomic selection and data-driven processes of machine learning and building those models to be able to predict sort of which parents to bring together. Those large agribusinesses have been using it in their corn and soybean programs. Our competitors have started to use it, Australia, and they're using it at cost, speed, and at scale. And so certainly in Australia, they've seen tremendous gains from a pulse perspective in the short time that they've adopted it. And I think I would say, again, another wish or another call to action is and again, we're at the crossroads of where we go in Canada. You've raised, Stuart, that we're at sort of economic pressures from a funding perspective. Patty, you raised the good issue of capacity building, and Francois around data. And so if we think about the need then to build these genomic selection data-driven models to be able to inform our breeding decisions and really get that increased rate of genetic gain that the dairy industry has seen, we need to really start to come together in sort of a pre-competitive basis to bring together those models. And even if you modestly think about the annual rate of genetic gain over 30 years in pulses as an example, the numbers are staggering. And so data from Stats Canada shows that the last 30 years, we've seen an approximately 0.85% increase per year in yield for dry peas. And so if we just modestly say that technologies, again, like the dairy industry has used, if we put that and apply it here in the cropping industry in Canada, and we double that to 1.69%. And so by 2035, this results in an additional 4.8 million tons of dry peas, an additional $2.1 billion in revenue. And we do have a productivity gap in Canada. We have slipped in our standings of exports. And we do have urgency around climate change and economic pressures and all those kinds of things. And so, which is why I think we need to, yes, adopt some of these technologies at speed, at cost, but also through a more collaborative model through public-private partnerships to really be able to really truly leverage the power of data to inform, sort of breeding decisions and increase rates of genetic gain through genomic technologies.
Thank you, Nancy. So, Ian, just building on what Nancy said at the end there, one of the things that has always struck me as being a really key and important part of the structure of Genome Canada is that public-private participation model. Where, and even the CGIAR system has said its long-term strategy is to increase its role or utilization of P3s in all of its strategies. Where, from a Canadian perspective, where do you see the greatest potential for increasing the P3s within the Canadian plant breeding and agriculture system?
Yeah, I think Nancy's probably in the best position to, with what she's already said, given that they live kind of in that intersection. But I think for me, I see a lot of opportunity. I'm going to take it from a slightly different angle. Is where especially in crops that haven't seen the benefit of some advanced breeding techniques in the past. So, we've got corn, soy, and canola, and they've benefited greatly, but barley and oats and some of the pulses, and there's these others that may just not have the size of the market behind them to command as many research dollars or the same amount of acreage in the field to draw solely private investment into the sector. I think those are the areas where, smaller companies, smaller research institutions combined with government or other funding, and maybe partnered with a large company that has a distribution network that's already in place, like where everybody can come together and everybody can see benefit in a collaborative approach to research. I think that's where I see some potential opportunities, is in the crops that haven't had the same chance to take the benefit of past technologies, this P3s and the new technologies with the right regulatory environment, which seems the winds are blowing in the right direction for that. This is a global network of activity, of regulatory activity, but it seems like there's an opportunity where that could all come together and it not be incredibly cost prohibitive to do that kind of research with things like CRISPR. But maybe I'll tie into that. One of the other advantages, or there was thoughts about, how to get to commercialization. And I think when you have collaborative P3s with, whether it's a grower group plus a small company plus a large company plus et cetera, the opportunity to engage with your trade associations that work in those commodities, because while it might be a local problem you're trying to solve, you're going to be trading into a global trade environment. So being aware of what that product is going to bring and how to manage it on the world scale is really important. I think, solve the problems at home, but we have to look outward and make sure that our commodity groups are fully aware of what we're doing and they're ready for it to enter into the trade system.
Thank you, Ian. Lauren, one of the things that I'm observing over the last few years is that a lot of the R&D funding entities are seeming to move towards shorter grant periods. So instead of providing funding for 5 or 7 years, they're down to 4, and in some instances even 3 years. Yet the plant breeders themselves are saying we need those longer time periods of, 7 years is even too short, doesn't provide us with the stability to really get in and do the crux of the R&D we need. We need 10-year financial commitments. So how do you see sort of this divergence between what the length of time funders are comfortable in providing funding for versus what breeders are saying they need?
Yeah, if I look at it from the standpoint of the public institutional funders, i.e. government, I think that's kind of the result of just the fiscal pressures. People want results quicker, sooner, more with less, that whole, and I get it that even from a farmer perspective, when they have an issue like fusarium or a new pest, crop disease, whatever, they want research and they want a solution in pretty short order. And if you're the politician that's advancing some funds, and those are big client base for them, everybody's pushing for, here's some money and we want to see results pretty darn quick. So I kind of get that. Having said that, as I explained earlier on my microbiome example, I really think there is a need to do the longer term, high impact, transformational, disruptive kind of research. My example is microbiome. It might not be the right one or a good one, but in that kind of thing. And that's where you need the longer term funding. Genome Canada, has had the programs that have ended up through you guys, bigger tranches of funding for longer periods of time. But, this is the kind of stuff that does take funding over a much longer period. I think part of the solution here is Canada's got to get serious about funding R&D. There's lots of articles. It's not just agriculture. There was a story the other day about the expenditure on health R&D in the US versus Canada. It was pathetic, the numbers. It's not close. It's really quite embarrassing. And so one could argue it's not a big surprise that if you look at our productivity gap between ourselves and the US, it's growing every year. And I would argue part of that is because of the lack of investment in research and innovation in Canada. I mean, some of the numbers I have is that Canada, among the G7 and the OECD countries, we're lagged by 40% investment in research and innovation, both from a government and industry standpoint. So I think we've really got to come, and this is like, you know, I could have said this 10 years ago. It's just that it's getting worse. And ergo, maybe no surprise that funding is just that much tougher and the requirements are that much tighter, et cetera. So I mean, we've been very preoccupied with wealth distribution in this country. We really need to spend some time on the wealth creation. We've got to make the economic pie bigger, and very much part of that is research innovation. The whole PPP thing, to me, very much part of the future. Notwithstanding what I've just said about government, I mean, the debts and deficits they face, you are going to have, and ourselves at ARIO, Research Institute of Ontario, you know, very much part of our strategic plan is to do a better job of reaching out to partners. I mean, congratulations to Global Institute for Food Security. I just see the provincial government added up another tranche of funding for you guys. So good on you for that. You know, one of the models that's been fairly successful for us at ARIO on the infrastructure funding, the research facilities, is in terms of the partnerships, the industry, whether it's the swine industry, the beef industry, the dairy industry, they have typically anteed up 20% of any new build. And the new builds all run in that $20 to $25 million range. So they've come together and pulled together their money to fund that as part of their commitment to infrastructure. And the final point I would make here is that from our standpoint, we've got to do a lot better job of knocking on doors. If in looking for potential partners and offering up what we see as our advantages. You know, we've got a very strong balance sheet. We've got a lot of land. In some ways, we're like farmers. We're land rich and cash poor. But, you know, we've got the infrastructure, and we got to make a point of making others aware of the opportunities that are out there. So,
thank you, Lauren. Francois, I'm curious as to, you know, Ag Canada is the largest player in cereal development in Canada. Certainly the dominant player in wheat, but also in barley and other cereal varieties. So in these discussions around the importance of shifting to P3s and more research partnership leveraging, this might be the impossible panel question to pose to you, but do you so what are the perspectives from Ag Canada towards some of these, to some extent it might be a radical innovation to shift into these areas? Do you see this as being something that Ag Canada is open to, or sort of, can you shed some insights on your side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, AFC has a culture of partnership. Interestingly, at some point I was looking in Prairie region, so looking at all our sites, 6 research and development centers and 9 farms. We had 800 partnerships. So partnerships, and I'm talking about science and technology branch. Obviously, you're aware of the Sustainable Canadian Agriculture Partnership led by program branch. So there's a lot of more collaboration with various parties, funding public, but also private organization who are seeking a co-funding from AFC. But we do collaborate extensively with other science providers and funders. And even the model of 3P, and this is something we are experiencing. We have for years, in fact, established some 3P partnership, either in cereals or pulse. And we are constantly looking at this opportunity to work with others. I think one shift we are seeing is we want to see ourselves just beyond being the largest national science organization, and so science provider in agriculture, to being an organization that is going to support others in their success. And so in the model of 3P, it's an opportunity to help Canadian SMEs to grow We do work also with multinationals. We have projects with international companies, but we're very interested in being part of growing an ecosystem in Canada. And I think that might be the evolution beyond the 3P. You know, a 3P partnership, you have tight terms in that partnership, and a lot of this is confidential. So it's not, essentially, you're picking someone to work with, but you may leave others without the same benefit of the partnership. So, you know, there might be models even beyond a 3P partnership where it's more open. And I think there's great success when you look at the canola. You know, I mean, AFC has been pioneering the development of that plant species into a crop in such a success. And we were doing the plant breeding and finishing varieties in the early years, but retracted to focus more on the genomic piece of work, so a bit more upstream in the continuum of breeding, and put in place a system where we're not picking just one company in a 3P partnership or 4P partnership, including the producers, but we have established a consortium where all the major players in finishing or commercializing hybrid canola in the Canadian market can invest in the science that is done, and they have access to the novel trait. I mean, novel, it can be just a new gene for resistance to a disease, but also just in general, the germplasm with a new value in the genetic material. And they can integrate it in their breeding program, bring this innovation to the commercial farms. And we see these results when we hear, for example, the result of the 5 years cluster, canola cluster, under the Canadian Agriculture Partnership. So this 5 years cycle of investment just closed a year ago. And you see that the impact of this investment, and as the cluster lead organization is saying, very high rate of adoption by these companies who are finishing the development of hybrid canola variety for producers. So I think we have a few models, and certainly there's great opening within AFC to look at other models where we could have a greater impact. But due to our diversity across the country of crop species relationships, models, I think we can learn from those and shift the way we develop this partnership. Again, we have quite a lot of experience in 3P. Myself, I've been involved in selecting partner and establishing 3P partnership or 4P partnership in either cereals and pulse. But I think there's even better model that we should be considering, that would be supporting a greater diversity of players, stakeholders within our agriculture ecosystem.
Thank you, Francois. Great examples on Ag Canada's willingness to step up and be a leader in this P3 or P4 space. Fantastic. So now we're going to turn over to some of the questions that have been posed over the last little bit. So I'll fire them out to the panel as a whole, and I just encourage panelists to be as succinct as you can, so we can try to get through as many of these questions as we can in the remaining time we've got here. So the first question comes regarding what's the acceptance of genetically modified plant growth promoting bacteria, and is this a concern for the ag sector, or is this just simply an evolution of standard business practices? You guys are like my students when I ask a question. Francois, do you have a perspective on this?
Well, I know we're doing a lot of research in this area. Now, I do know also that there's public sensitivity on the use of the technology on various type of microorganisms. I believe there is some openness to deploy this technology in microorganism. But in fact, interestingly, I'm not much aware of these type of microorganisms going through our regulatory process. But I think another panelist has, yes.
I don't,
wanted to take it.
This is a bit of a new subject to me, but when I think about where things usually run into, market challenges, this doesn't seem like a place where I would initially think you would get a lot of questions. This is down into the production level piece. And I think of like GM yeasts for cheese production, right? Like that's been used for years because you're back at the inputs level, not the product level at the end of the day. I'm sure there are certain production systems that would probably not adopt it or a non-GMO project certified or something like that. But for an applicability to the farm, if you can get inoculants that are going to help you use less inputs, there'll be a big drive to figure out how to adopt them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ian.
Add our perspective, I think, here. I mean, this isn't on our market access, long list of market access issues right now. But if there is a commercial concern, sometimes that's answered through a, kind of an IP production-based program. So it would be outside of the core CGC work. If it was something that produced something that was on the grain that shipped, this happens a lot. We're asked, usually in the customer country, through the customer, through the exporter to us, can we guarantee it is free from whatever? And sometimes we can and sometimes we can't. And then usually there's quite a long negotiation between, often Global Affairs Canada leads that to try and figure out what Canada is able to and willing to guarantee on bulk export shipments. That would be my thoughts there. It's not on our list yet, though.
Thank you, Patty. Thank you all. So the next question is more about some of the innovations in AI, using data analytics, novel technology, smart breeding. What kind of role are they going to play in helping to develop the crop varieties of the future?
I'll maybe jump into this one. Absolutely, it's going to have a huge impact. And talk about genomics at work. AI is going to change the way that we do crop breeding. We think about all the data. One of the panelists talked about all the data that we've collectively, as breeding organizations, generated over the years, and if we could put that sort of data to work to be able to really launch crop breeding into the next century. Also on the sensor side of things too, when we think about the ability for genomics technology to be able to take a fingerprint, a genomic fingerprint, to be able to diagnose crop diseases. And so that's a huge area that can, I think, revolutionize the way that we sort of treat diseases in field. It's really difficult for a farmer to really predict when that disease comes in and therefore make that decision to spray. So whether that's a genomic-based sensor or some other kind of biosensor, I think it's really going to change the way that we do things. And if you think also just back to the breeding example, using sort of new high throughput digital phenotyping, a breeder I used to enjoy going through with our wheat breeder in the field and walking the field. And it was a bit of an art in combination with the science. But if you think about tools like Plot Vision that we've put together here at the Global Institute for Food Security, can sort of take a picture and really, make that picture into 1,000 different data points then that can be used to sort of phenotype those programs. So absolutely, all of the above in that question, all of those are really going to really change the game from an agriculture technology perspective here in Canada.
Thank you, Nancy. Anybody else want to comment on this?
Cami. I will. So AI is one of those things that, has popped up, and it either makes people go, ooh, or it makes them go, ooh, there's two things. But I always argue, make AI your friend, get to know it a little bit, take it out for lunch, doesn't have to be a long-term committed relationship, but I think getting to know it a little bit better also helps, because the thing is, AI is here to stay, and it's not, people are often afraid, oh, well, it's going to take our jobs away, or it's going to do this, or it's going to impact that, or it's full of misinformation. I mean, that part's often true. But the thing with AI is that it won't take away our jobs, but it will provide us with even more tools to do our jobs better. So if we get to understand it, and especially if we're moving towards data-driven farming and food production, these kinds of tools are going to be really helpful in that space. I mean, precision ag, field view. We've got a field view from Climate Corps and Bayer Crop Science, but these are the kinds of things that are really going to revolutionize how farmers do the work they do, and they get value from it. And I mean, we're growing, it's embryonic right now, but I think these things are going to get even better and better in the future.
Thank you, Cami. Cami, the next question's more so in your area. Bayer is a leader in pollinator, programs around improved pollinator health and the importance of pollinators and biodiversity. Where do you see the potential for new technology to contribute to improved biodiversity?
Can I keep my mute? Oh, yes. Yeah, well, I think that this is where precision ag comes in, right? When we're able to do these things like Nancy referred to, like being able to plot and map spaces and understand exactly what needs to be prescribed, at the soil level and so forth, where we actually get the value from on our farmland and improve that productivity or optimize that productivity, then we can better allow some of those spaces to go back into the wild where the biodiversity, that's where those biodiverse spaces can be really developed. I mean, we live in a great country, and I lived in the US for 8 years, and I will tell you 100%, everybody talks about how wonderful the natural environment of Canada is. We've got a lot of natural spaces, but it doesn't mean we can't do better on the farm. So I think some of these precision based technologies and advances, and I'm sure that Francois has some thoughts about this, this is where we can really make a difference from a biodiversity perspective.
Thank you, Cami. Francois, would you care to jump in? Thank you.
Yeah, I certainly agree. In fact, the technology, sensors, the various type of sensors help us to collect new type of data sets as well, or a larger volume of data sets, and increase the data-driven decision that we can make up to the breeding level. You look at the instrumentation in labs also, they do generate very large type of data sets. And so through machine learning, the development of these algorithms that are part of artificial intelligence, you can train these artificial intelligence to associate the different type of data sets and help with a decision incorporating additional type of data sets, for example, again, on the type of nectar or product that the flower is going to produce that would impact pollinators. That otherwise in the classical breeding, the breeder would not have access to these type of data sets for incorporating such factor or trait in his program. So yeah, there's a great potential. And again, it's how we're going to use it.
Thank you, Francois. The next question is
Stuart.
Yes, go ahead, Lauren.
Can I just weigh in on this? A question to Cami and maybe others based on what they've said. I mean, farmers today, as far as I understand it, they'll go out, they do the soil testing for NPK. I mean, do you see the day in the future where they're going to be going out and soil testing for microbes or other elements that we typically, just like they do soil testing for NPK, are they going to be testing for biological things? Just where do you see that headed?
Well, I'd say yes, anything is possible. I think that moving forward, I think that there's those opportunities where you find you're going to prioritize development of certain technologies or ways of doing things. And it might not even be done by a company like ours, right? But moving forward, you see where there's a gap and where there's an opportunity. That's how we do things. And maybe to some of the points that Ian brought up, that's where public-private partnerships come in, because these are, again, complex problems. And sometimes complex problems and developing those solutions can't be done within a silo. So this is where these partnerships really matter. So can I say what's going to come? I don't know. That's maybe above my pay grade, but I do think that I never imagined where we'd be now when I started in agriculture 30 years ago. So who knows? imagination is the limit.
Thank
And
you.
Maybe I'll
Lauren,
jump.
the one thing that I'd add to that great answer, Cami, is that we're going to continue to be able to measure a lot of things, whether those are, you know, the soil microorganisms. I think the real difference at the farmer level is going to be helping them to then make that decision, because I think the point that we're stuck at right now, we can measure lots and lots of things, but unless that results in a very informed decision-making tool, and decision support system for the farmer, that's where we sort of need to get to. And that's where we can get to through the power of AI and various building models. And it's been done in the healthcare system, and I know we can do it in agriculture as well.
Francois, was there a follow-up you wanted to have?
Yes, it's only doing some soil analysis, and whatever it's physical soil analysis, chemical, biological, it's very challenging. You think about in Prairie region, 1 mile by 1 mile canola field, and you want to sample the soil. You know, where do you go? Well, how many samples do you collect? And are you going to have, well, first, the cost associated with doing all this different type of analysis. So currently, it's very laborious, costly to have, I would say, a very accurate measurement of the different composition of the soil structure, again, physical, chemical, or biological. But there is this is an area where there is a great interest in finding new ways, new method to measure, and especially, you know, I'm thinking of the context of the carbon policies. You know, how do you measure effectively carbon content in a large field when you do essentially physically you sample that field. So there may be remote sensing type technology that would allow to take some of, or to acquire some of these data sets without physically removing a soil sample and bringing it in the lab. And among the future technology to watch, I think we have to pay attention to where quantum sensing is going to go and the potential application of quantum sensing in agriculture. So to better inform, you know, what's happening in that soil, what is the current nutrient content in that soil for that particular crop, and can we acquire this data with this future quantum sensing technology? I know currently the focus is on other application outside agriculture, but I think the agriculture is a great place to look at quantum sensing applications.
Thank you. So I think we've got time for one more quick question here. And this one is one that I've been championing for a decade that's fallen on deaf ears. I think that our compartmentalization or siloing of data is reducing our R&D capacity, that we're duplicating research because we don't know what data's already been collected. Do you see potential value in having not necessarily a depository for the actual data sets, but a depository of what data sets exist? So I could put on there that I've got a data set of A and B and X, and some Francois can put on what he's got. And so, you know, researchers then could access this depository of data sets and say, oh, well, you know what, I was going to do a $50,000 study, but I see much of the data is there, so I might only need to do a $10,000 study to fill in the gaps. Where do you see the potential for increased, at least data set awareness, playing a role in enhancing our innovation capacity?
100%, couldn't agree more. The compartmentalization of the data really inhibits our ability to use the power of data to accelerate innovations. And so, and people will say, well, that's difficult, right? Because there's this whole thing around data privacy and ownership and IP and all those kinds of things. But there's ways around that. You can still bring that data sort of infrastructure together. And certainly within the public research infrastructure, I think that should be a sort of a mandatory piece around that. But there's ways to sort of anonymize the data in sort of this pre-competitive public-private partnership aspect. And so I think we can get over those concerns, but if we are to truly leverage the power of data, 100% agree with the question. Do need to sort of bring it together. I love the analogy, Cami, let's take it out for lunch. Let's explore the option instead of really getting scared about it. The power of data can only work when we come together and really sort of explore that option to host it sort of together.
So I'll jump in too, because data today is an asset. So everyone is asking, what am I ready to share and under what terms? When it comes to science in scientific organization, I mean, there is a lot of experience in sharing data. Think about NCBI database where all the genomics, transcriptomics, proteomics type data is placed. Usually once the work is completed and the scientific publication is accepted for publication, that's where the science experts are going to upload data on this database, make it available to the greater audience. In order to have access to each other's data, be able to reuse it, there is a number of parameters that are important, in which, and I'm thinking at the data quality, but also data standards and the appropriate metadata associated with the scientific data. So you can recombine the different type of data sets. And in the space of breeding, USDA is leading an initiative to establish the data standards for all crop species grown in Canada to support the breeding programs, public and private. So a strong focus on establishing these standards so everyone adopt the same standards. And in some field of science, there is international standards being developed, such as in phenomics, in genomics. And this is key if we want to be able to share data, because if everyone uses different standards, different descriptors, where there's no common identifier, you won't be able to use the data sets of somebody else, or you would have to have someone to help you convert all these data sets to your own standards. So there's a lot of work that remain to be done on adopting these standards, and in some case developing them. And that's an area of science that we really need to work on in Canada.
Thank you, Francois. Thank you, Nancy. Well, clearly we need more genomics research on healthier food, because I'm going to be taking technologies out to lunch so often that I'm going to need something to help keep my waist as narrow as possible. So thank you to the panelists. Excellent session, great questions, and I'd like to turn it back over to Heiss and Lester for some final comments.
Thank you so much, Stuart. A quick comment on the last question. I think as many people know, I think from a Genome Canada, Genome Prairie, Genome Alberta, Genome Centre perspective, so for most of the funding initiatives going forward, there will be sort of a dedicated sort of data coordination center that will basically bring different data sets together from different projects. And I think that is in an effort to address partially, I guess, sort of the challenge of making sure that we bring data sets together, and that when we create larger data sets, we basically get more information that we can take advantage of. So with that, I think I'm respectful of everyone's time. So first of all, I would like to again sort of wrap this up and express my big thank you to the moderator and the panelists. I think, Stuart, you have been fabulous in volunteering your time and also to keep the panelists on track here. For you fellow panelists, thank you so much. I mean, you've all volunteered your time. I think you're clearly very passionate about the issues that we have discussed here today. And of course, we couldn't have done this session without your support and without your help. So on behalf of Genome Prairie and Genome Alberta, I think we're very grateful for you to be part of this conversation. I think it definitely will inform at least Genome Alberta's and Genome Prairie's sort of strategy in thinking going forward on basically where some of our future investments will need to lie. And so I think this is very helpful. So there's still a couple of questions that I think we did not have the time to have them addressed. What we'll try to do with those questions is we may feed them back to the panelists and try to see whether we can get some responses to those additional questions. And they'll be incorporated into the final report as well. So I think with that, so on behalf of Lester and myself, again, thank you so much, moderator, panelists, and finally, you attendees for attending. I think you are an important part of this conversation. And if you have any questions or would like to stay in touch, I think you know where to find us. I think we're all big supporters and we're big believers in what the genomics can do for the prairie crop industry. And I think collectively, I think we need to push in order to make that happen. So with that, we're 1 minute beyond time. I would like to adjourn this discussion. Once again, thank you all and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.